Welcome to the Bias Buzz. I'm Don Irvine. I'm joined by my very special guest, Jerry Cave. Good morning, Jerry.
Good morning, Don. Thank you for having me today. It's always great to be with you, but after winning, it's even better.
Victory is sweet, doesn't it? All
It
right.
works.
It works. All right. Well, you're in here because you had there was an interview you just had with recently with the Atlantic magazine called "The Ingenious Marketing Strategist Behind Trump's Win." So walk me through this.
Well, it's interesting. Let's start in the beginning. So first off, you have to understand that Donald Trump is a businessman and he's also risk averse. So whatever he does when he analyzes going into something, it's not that it's likely to succeed, it's inevitable that he'll succeed, and then he crafts a way to do it. So the first thing he did was look at the numbers to decide that this was winnable. And the more important thing I'll get to a little bit later is his media selection, which was critical. So when he looked at everything, like all the other Republicans, they figured that if they win Florida and Colorado, they have 253 electoral votes. Now they need 17. They're all looking east and west to get either Colorado or Virginia, but those states have been lost to us for a while. Trump was smarter. He looked north into the Midwest. Now the color, this is all has to do with the color spectrum, and the color is blue. It's not black, it's not white, it's not brown, it's blue and blue-collar jobs. And that appeals to white folks, black folks, brown folks, everybody, men and women. And that's what he targeted. And that was an underserved constituency by both parties, but especially the Democratic Party, because that's a core constituency for them, and they had neglected them. Both parties had done them wrong, so that was going to be his message. And the beautiful part about that message is he could run that message as he did against the Republicans and against the Democrats, so he never had to change it, which communicates credibility and sincerity. And nothing is more powerful than sincerity. And I'll skip the joke about once you have sincerity, you have it made, but everybody's heard that before. So he was able to have a crisp, clear, credible message from beginning to end. It was all about blue-collar jobs because they had been insourced and outsourced, and he stayed on that the whole way through. And that had great appeal to people. Now, the critical thing is, and it all goes back to your organization and what your father started and what you all are working on, and that is that the media is totally biased against us. All the other candidates were going to get a small amount of interviews. They were going to be interpreted by the reporters, the pundits, and the anchors, and they were going to be interpreted negatively by those people to the community. So Trump, the other mistake all the other candidates were going to make is they were going to do what they'd all done in the past, which didn't work, was spend the whole year raising $1 billion of TV advertising, which people tune out mentally and now can tune out digitally, and doesn't have any credibility because it's paid advertising. Now the Democrats were going to have $1 billion, so he'd spend all years raising $1 billion to be at parity. So when you start a business, you're going to market it. You don't look at where you can be parity with your competition, where you can dominate. So he did not focus on paid advertising. He focused on the editorial part. And he did that and others, but let's start with the editorial part of television editorial part on the talk shows and the news shows. He could win that contest because he had the energy to be on it from 7 o'clock in the morning till 10 o'clock at night. Hillary did not. That's a win for him. 2, he's very experienced in it, and he could make that work. He could. She couldn't. He also is good at communications, controversy, and combativeness, and that is what works on television, so that he could get on all the time, and then networks, as much as they hated him, still had to cover him, and he knew that. Then he had a real interesting technique, and I call it New York shorthand. When I studied it in college. It's called social psychology, and everybody does it. You come home, and your wife says, "Oh, my gosh," and you go, "No, honey, I took out the trash and I got the papers into the school board." If you look at the text, it doesn't make any sense. So he speaks in New York shorthand, and when he would talk about jobs, those people in the Midwest did not need the rest of the sentence or the paragraph because they knew it before he said it, because they had experienced the pain of those jobs leaving. So he would do a short part of it. Now, the people in New York and Washington would go crazy. They're like, we're expecting George Will. We want the entire paragraph explained to us. And he didn't do that. So he would dominate the news cycle as people pushed back against what he said. Then you'd have other people come and say, well, you know what? He actually had a pretty good point. And they would either validate part of it or all of it. That was the second day of the news cycle. The third day it would continue, and then some point of the third day he'd come out with another controversial statement and dominate the next 72 hours of the news cycle. He had, by the end of September, as measured by MediaMax, on the campaign for both Hillary and him, the media had spent, radio, television, social media, $12 billion. Now, most of that was negative against Donald Trump. But that was okay because 3/4 of the American people, as in a Gallup survey, show that they don't believe the media. So if they're saying Donald Trump is bad, those people that don't trust the media are going to at least consider, wow, he might be good, or I'm going to look further. The other thing is he was not relegated to just being interpreted by what they said about him. He was actually able to get on there. And he spoke in a style not like Washington and New York, the NYC-DC corridor. He spoke like regular people speak. Syntax isn't always correct and everything, and people understood what he said. So he was able to pierce through, to be on all the time. He was repetitive. And I remember 3 days before the campaign, one of the egghead writers out of New York going, "Oh, I can't stand it, he repeats himself," as if that was a negative, when actually that's a positive. In school, they call it the rote method. In advertising, we call it frequency. And in politics, as I wrote, it's called winning. So if you only saw him once or twice, you got his message because he repeated it several times. So he was able to dominate in the wider scale of television on the editorial. I mean, what would you rather have, $12 billion or $1 billion of stuff that people don't believe? And that doesn't even include several $billion more that was spent in the month of October and up to the campaign.
Yeah, so that's really interesting. I mean, just to what you were saying there too, in terms of repeating himself in advertising, marketing, isn't it generally expected that you don't go out and you don't buy just one ad one time. You need to have those repeat impressions to hit the different audience. But people have to hear these things over and over and over again, sometimes before it really starts to sink in and get the message. Say, oh yeah, I understand that, I get that, I love that, whatever. Going back to this 253 to 270 strategy, looking at the blue states and things like that, was that, in your mind, a strategy from day one, or did it become more in focus after Kellyanne Conway, Dave Bossie, those people joined the campaign? What did you see?
I saw it, and it was definitely from the get-go, because I saw that, and there were two key moments for me. One is when he gave his first speech, and he was talking about illegal immigration. And what that was really about was about the fact that good manufacturing jobs have been outsourced or insourced. And I'm like, well, that happened. That's been a negative everywhere, all 50 states, but it's in particular a negative in the Midwest, which is now no longer called the Rust Belt. Under the Trump administration, it's going to be called the Recovery Belt. But so it was clearly obvious to me. I just looked at that and I go, he's going north. Imagine when you have generals and wars and you're studying history and they go, oh, okay, all these guys do the conventional thing, and then all of a sudden Napoleon comes in and goes, well, I'm not doing what didn't work in the past. I'm going north. So everything pointed for him to do that, and I saw that in the very first one, and that's what worked.
Well, that's good. What else, did he do that's unique? I mean, this earned media thing probably broke all kinds of records, I would imagine. I can't imagine anybody having this kind of earned media ever.
It not only has nobody else ever had that much earned media, and what's really funny is the media hated him, but they were covering him as a joke. But they have to cover him because he's news, and news builds ratings, and that builds revenue, and they don't have any choice about that. And then once he won the primary, they were like, "I'm going to stop him, so we're going to cover him more and be more negative." And to the people that didn't believe him, they were like, "Well, you're reinforcing why I'm voting for him." It was brilliant, and he's doing it today as he puts together his administration. He is throwing up things to distract them because they seamlessly transitioned. It's amazing how they didn't expect him to win, but they didn't miss a beat in delegitimizing his campaign once he won. And his tone did change, by the way. But what he does is he's putting together his administration, and he's talking to all these people, inviting them in, and all the media does is speculate on why they don't like someone that he may bring in and what they might do. So he's throwing out stuff like that while he's very carefully putting together his administration. He's playing what I call rope-a-dope. Muhammad Ali when he got older and couldn't just beat the heck out of you in 2 rounds, he would stretch it out, drag it out, and distract you, and that's what he's doing. What's the social media aspect is also very interesting. Ironically, Governor Larry Hogan got elected by starting Change Maryland on social media on Facebook, and he ran that for 2-3 years before the election.
Right.
Larry Hogan and Donald Trump used basically the same strategy to get elected, and Larry Hogan is all but he disavowed Trump, and it's really ironic. So Hogan came out and didn't run on any of the cultural issues and said so. Trump couldn't do that, but he addressed the social issues to the extent he needed to, and then no more. But they also focused on social media, and here Trump was peerless. He dominated on Twitter almost by himself, and on Facebook. His Facebook was much better. He had 50% more social media than Hillary did, and 40% of hers was fake. Now, I know his was not fake because I was in communication with the office, and they were so thinly staffed, they didn't have the people to fake it. I don't know if they had the expertise to fake it, but they didn't have the people to fake it. So his was genuine, and what I saw, remember the low points when the Billy Bush tape came out?
Right.
Guys with the campaign would say, Cave, what are you seeing in the social media? I said, are people losing heart? I said, the only way you can stop these people from voting is you'd have to shoot them, and you'd have to shoot all of them. So they held firm. They didn't care about that nonsense. They were still focused. And the more he talked about rigging, and everybody said, oh, talk about the issues, he was completely correct to talk about rigging because it had 2 effects. One is it was an intimidation to people who were going to cheat because it was like, we're going to be looking for that. But more importantly, it energized our people. So when they put out a request for volunteers in Prince William County, Virginia, and they wanted 20, they got 100. When they asked for help to get people to drive the Amish to the polls, because they can ride in cars, they just can't drive them, they had 1,500 people volunteer. So when he, his social media was unbelievable. And what I just said, that he had 50% more, that doesn't even include the fact there was a whole army of what I call the new Minutemen, who are Minutemen and women, who are on social media with Facebook pages and Twitter accounts reaching tens, if not hundreds of millions of people with millions and millions of impressions and engagements. The pages I was running were reaching 2.5 million people with 500,000 engagements. And I do that in my professional career, and that level of engagement is off the charts.
Yeah, on the Twitter thing too, I think the media definitely paid a lot of attention to that. The stories that you would generally see were just that Trump would probably destroy himself by his use of Twitter and the things he was saying on Twitter. But, I mean, he created news. You look at now going forward, we don't have a press secretary yet, and though I'm assuming that there'll be one eventually. But, I looked at it from the stage. He's rewritten the book here on a lot of things, and particularly with the relationship with the media. Does he really need the media going forward? I mean, he is the news. The press is now in a completely different role. Their traditional role as a White House press corps has been completely changed.
Technology and Trump taking advantage of it you hit the nail right on the head, Don. He does not need the media anymore. And that was demonstrated during the campaign. He was communicating, he was communicating directly with the people. And he held on to his people. And understand something, every time they shared it to their Twitter account or their Facebook page, it went beyond the faithful, and that was proselytizing to the people we ended up converting, independents and Democrats. And it was really orchestrated the night he came out and attacked the press on TV and told them how dishonest they were. And then he gave an update on his transition team. He didn't call up NBC and say, I need 15 minutes. He just put it out there on YouTube. Everybody saw it. They don't need the media anymore. The media is irrelevant. They don't accept that they're irrelevant. They don't accept that their advice is unwanted. They don't accept that their advice is unneeded. And they don't accept that all of their advice is actually the opposite of what he did and the opposite of what he should do.
Yeah, I mean, does the media have a right to cover the president? I mean, that they should be there at everything that he does. I mean, they complained when he ran off for that dinner, and they didn't. The press pool wasn't able to cover him. I didn't have a problem with that. I love the transition video because I thought that was a brilliant stroke. Take care. You control the message. You're the president. You can control the message. You don't need these guys.
He doesn't need them. He can communicate literally in social media without them. And it is just great to watch them. And I mean, what happened in this election also is that the media has always been against every Republican since I've been alive. Maybe they weren't against Dwight Eisenhower, but they were sure against Nixon and everybody afterwards. So they were more against Trump and more transparent about it because he was more formidable. So he doesn't need them anymore. But there's more to the messaging here I wanted to talk about.
Well, go ahead. Yeah, go.
So, he did the same thing everybody else does, get your email campaign and communicates with you. But he didn't do that by himself. He created really interesting surrogates. Chris Christie was a surrogate for a while, and then when he was no longer as impactful, he would transition out. He had Ben Carson, who was a good message, Ivanka, and really his wife, Melania, had a great role. I mean, she's a model, she's a brilliant woman, but she's a model, and her poise. So her just being there in poise was a nonverbal, great communication. Everybody's looking at that going, man, it's like getting Jackie Kennedy back in the White House. So, but he communicated with email, but this one was really brilliant. Text. He got everybody to text you the number. He then had access to your text, and he would communicate with people 2, 3, 4 times a week, no clutter. It's not like doing an email where you have to fight through the clutter. He did that. So that was really brilliant. The other thing he did is event marketing. Now, as we were talking earlier, event marketing started, believe it or not, at Woodstock, where there was no event marketing. And all the beer companies looked at Woodstock and they saw their demographic with no signage, not to mention no product. So event marketing was born then, and Trump had the ability to do that because he had the energy to do it. The Sunday before the election, he started at 10 o'clock in the morning. 5 states later, 2 o'clock in the morning, he's in Virginia. I don't know anybody could have done that but him. He had the ability to do that unscripted, show up, and he had the ground. Everybody's going ground game. He had better ground game than anybody because he could sit there on Wednesday and say, I want to be Friday night in this place, and his team would put it together at an event, security, everything was perfect. And think about the people that showed up. It was like tailgating with no beer, no burgers, no hot dogs, no widescreen TV, no pre-show, pre-game show, nothing. They sat there for 2-3 hours waiting for him. And it not only reached the people that showed up, but the people that wanted to show up, the people that they talked about, the local news coverage and the national news coverage. Even though the national media suppressed the attendance, but he had a couple million people show up to that. So his event marketing, and again, that was something he could do, energy-wise, personality-wise, speaking-wise, that Hillary couldn't do physically or had the personality for it. But also, she couldn't do that for the same reason she couldn't do the editorial part of television. She couldn't afford to have the questions asked. She only had 1 or 2 press conferences a whole year.
That's right. Have you been hitting that microphone?
I've never talked to microphone off the stand before. It's kind of a new event.
Yeah, you've been playing with that cord over there.
So the event marketing was good. I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say the event marketing was brilliant in the long run. From the time he started to run, all the way through, the crowds were incredible. And I think the media. This is another area where the media really got this wrong. I mean, they considered that really what Trump was getting out of this was it was his celebrity status that was attracting them, and not his message and everything else. And that these crowds, they would show up, but they were not going to be the people who were actually going to wind up voting for him. And that was all proven wrong. I mean, there were a lot of blue-collar people in those audiences, and we saw the numbers. We saw what happened in those blue-collar states.
Yes. And what was fascinating is these people, listen, Americans don't wait. I mean, if you're in line to get your Starbucks coffee and you got to wait 60 seconds longer than you normally do, you're going to go crazy. These people all showed up, stood there and waited, no refreshments, no anything, and they couldn't get there fast enough. And if all of those people didn't show up, he could have filled it up two or three. He could have filled it up two or three
Just watch
times
out
over.
hitting that thing there.
But the main, so he selected media where he could win: social media, editorial, event, the text thing, and avoided sinkholes, going down, trying to raise money and do that. But when you look at, and this is what the mainstream media missed, but by the middle of October, third week of October, and I sent this to one of the major media organizations that will remain nameless for their embarrassment, as much as I'd like to embarrass them, but I like these guys. Here's what they failed to realize. He was going to win this. And the only way they could avoid seeing that was to do it on purpose. Because look at the metrics. They were relying, and toward the end, all the polls were done by the media that endorsed against him, advocated against him, and their polling was based on the Obama metrics, the sample base, when Democrats would show up because of the enthusiasm, but now we had the enthusiasm, but they didn't change the sample base. So so they're interviewing 1,000 people and projecting how 130 million people are going to vote. Here are much better metrics. He had more people vote in the Republican primary than ever before. He had more people do small dollar donations than had ever occurred before. And consider, they're donating to the campaign of a billionaire. He had 50% more social media. He had more earned media, and more people show up at these events. These are actions compared to the polls, which is just responding, that were also diminished because some people are embarrassed to say they were for Trump. So when you looked at those metrics, which I believe were more credible than the polling, and I've lived my whole life doing polling and sample bases and all this stuff, it was clear that he was going to win. Oh, and the early voting was the key thing. When he was getting out more people in the early votes and they were getting less, this all happened right on cue. And they couldn't see it because they didn't want to.
All right, so then let's wrap this up. What do you see going forward? I mean, the inauguration will take place in January. By then, the administration, at least all the cabinet selections should be lined up and getting ready for Senate confirmation. Press secretary should be selected. I assume that the president, that he'll take over or at least somebody will take over the POTUS Twitter account. Maybe Trump will maintain his own account, but maybe there is an official POTUS Twitter account. I don't know if Melania will do the FLOTUS Twitter account or not. That would be interesting. But what do you see going forward? I mean, and he's got this kind of victory tour going on, which is pretty amazing.
The speech last night in the victory tour was one of the greatest speeches I've ever seen. I've never seen anything more well-crafted. The thing where he announced that Mad Dog Mattis was going to be the man, and he said,
"What a great name!"
It really is, and he's a great human being. All my family in the service are beside themselves; they're all so happy. But the way he handled that, great stagecraft. He'll probably he's going to continue to have his relationship with the people in social media and on television. That's just too important. It's the backbone of the campaign. I'd like to see him get some help because he's also got to run the country. But the guy has he has the most incredible work ethic and energy, so he's going to continue to do that. And look at what he's doing now. You understand that he's been successful because he would look at the numbers, analyze what he's going to do, and he has to hire the right people. You aren't as successful with that. And he operates on a meritocracy. All the people that work for him say he's a great guy, and in the middle of the speech they go, wait a minute, you got to understand, you got to perform. If you don't perform, you're out. And also a key thing was revealed in the campaign. If you're successful in business, you not only have to hire right, but you have to fire fast. So when Lewandowski had kind of reached his expiration date, Trump, boom, fired him. He brings in Manafort, who was helpful during the convention, reached his expiration date, boom, and they brought in the right person, Kellyanne, to help on logistics. So he fires fast. And he's doing a great job with the cabinet. The most enjoyable thing of all, and I want to tell you something, I just didn't think God was going to give me this much enjoyment in life, in addition to having grandkids. But watching the Democratic Party, which has gone so far to the left, it's the Ted Kennedy Democratic Party, not the John Kennedy Party that my family had used to vote for. Watch that self-destruct is beautiful, and watching the people in the news media writhe in agony and fantasy as they criticize Trump on speculation, and the more successful he is, the more painful that will be for him. But here's the deal. It's like any kind of marketing or sales thing. You can win your first sales on promise. But going forward, and re-election and the midterms will be based on performance. And if past is prologue to the future, I think he's going to do very, very well.
All right. Well, I think that's a great synopsis, great wrap up to all of this. Thank you so much for coming in today and giving us this behind the scenes kind of look and digging deep into why Trump really won and what a brilliant strategy it was in the end that the media certainly did not see.
They didn't, and one thing I'd like to say, and it's well deserved, your organization kept the lights on during this dark period since World War II, when the media turned on the American people and turned on conservative and traditional values, and you kept the lights on fighting the fight until a guy like Trump came through with a strategy that could win it. So congratulations to you and your organization, because you fulfilled a very important part to make America great again.
I love it. Great. Thanks a lot, Jerry. And thank you for watching today, and we'll be back at our regular time and day next week with the Bias Buzz.